here with my co-host, Dr. Marissa Largo. We're both assistant professors in art education, and on behalf of the Division of Art History and Contemporary Culture, we'd like to welcome you to the NSCAD Public Lecture Series, Camille Turner, Unsilencing the Past. So we will first begin with a local territorial acknowledgement. NSCAD is in Mi'kma'ki, on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations.
And while we meet in a virtual space, we would also like to acknowledge the land upon which Camille is located, the ancestral lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We are grateful for this opportunity to carry out this creative and intellectual work on Turtle Island, the present-day home to Indigenous nations and other peoples, and respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in forging decolonial relations with others and the land.
Thank you. So just a few housekeeping things before we get started. So following the introductions, Camille will speak for about 45 minutes to an hour, and I'll collect questions from the Zoom chat, and Marissa will do the same for those who are in the Facebook Live event. And then we will relay audience questions for approximately 30 minutes from both of those sources.
I'd like to read Camille Turner's bio now. Camille Turner is an explorer of race, space, home, and belonging, straddling media, social practice, and performance art. Her work has been presented throughout Canada and internationally. Wanted, a collaboration with Kamal Pierhab, was shown most recently at the Art Gallery of Ontario and uses the trope of fashion to transform 18th century newspaper posts by Canadian slave owners into contemporary fashion ads. Freedom Tours, created collaboratively with Cree Métis artist Cheryl Hirondelle, is the National Commission for Landmarks 2017, Repair 2017, that consists of participatory site-specific events that reimagine and reanimate land and water from Black and Indigenous perspectives. The Afronautic Research Lab is a reading room in which participants encounter buried histories. The Landscape of Forgetting, a walk created collaboratively with Alana Bortal, and Sonic Walks, Hush Harbor, and the Resistance of Peggy Pompadour, evoke sites of Black memory that reimagine the Canadian landscape. Miss Canadiana, one of her earliest projects, challenges perceptions of Canadianness and troubles the unspoken binary of real Canadian and diverse other. Camille is the founder of Outer Region, an Afrofuturist performance group. She has lectured at various institutions such as the University of Toronto, Algoma University, and Toronto Art School, and is a graduate of the Ontario College of Art and Design and York University's Masters in Environmental Studies program, where she is currently completing a PhD. And please welcome Camille Turner with me today. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Greetings, everyone. Everyone who's here with us today. And many thanks to NSCAD for this invitation to speak about my work. Thank you, Dr. Largo. Thank you, Dr. Madrona, and everyone who's working hard behind the scenes. Ayoka and Tegan, the interpreters, thank you so much. And Anik, who's going to be doing the slides. Many thanks. Okay, so the next slide, please. Okay, I'm just waiting for this. I'm not sure if you can see the slides yet, so I'm just waiting a little bit here. Yeah, so I'm going to begin with a quote. The past is already in debt to the mismanaged present. And besides, contrary to what you may have heard or learned, the past is not done and it's not over. It is still in process, which is another way of saying that when what is critiqued and analyzed, it yields new information about itself. The past is already changing as it is being re-examined, as it is being listened to for deeper resonances. Actually, it can be more liberating than any imagined future if you are willing to identify its evasions, its distortions, its lies, and are willing to unleash its secrets. So these are the words that were spoken by the late Toni Morrison as part of her commencement speech at the graduating class of Wellesley College in 2004. And they are my guide to think about what it means to investigate the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans, the largest forced migration the world has ever experienced. This trade was foundational, and it brought into being the extractive capitalist economy of the modern world. The trade was justified by producing the concept of race, that is, dividing people into categories of fully human and other based on color. And these things are still with us. So, what does it mean to think about the immensity of this event, not as the past, but as something that is ongoing? And how are we in this time and this place connected to this event? So, as I share my work with you today, I invite you to think about these questions along with me. Okay, next slide. So my work is transdisciplinary, and I'm drawing from various fields here: history, archives, geography, and I'm combining digital media, installation, I'm walking, I'm using sound. Basically, I use whatever format best expresses my ideas. And since 2012, my work has been about unsilencing suppressed histories in what is now known as Canada. And to give you some insight into my work and my process, I'm going to start with this 7-minute piece that was created for a CBC series called Art is My Country. You know, when I talk about slavery, people automatically think that we're talking about the States. We're talking about somewhere else. It cannot be Canada. Overlooking a 100-acre farm. I want people to see this familiar place in a strange way. I want them to understand that there's way more to the ground that we're walking on. The dead may be silent, but they're always present. My name is Camille Turner. I'm an artist and I'm based in Toronto. The work I do is all about home and belonging. In particular, the people of African descent who have come here before me in this place that I find myself in. This is Miss Canadiana, a project that brought me a lot of attention. And this is the oldest Black institution in the city. 11 out of 25 of the founding fathers were slave owners. In fact, they were allowed to bring slaves here duty-free. I knew that there had been a Black community here, and most people have no idea that they existed. And so this whole project is about telling their stories. I was born in Jamaica. I came here to Canada when I was 9. I actually grew up in Hamilton.
It's a place where I've experienced way more open bigotry than anywhere else. In Canada, there's this kind of racial innocence. This idea that race doesn't matter, we don't see race, but that's not really true. There's so much of the past that's been willfully forgotten. This is an ad that appeared in the Upper Canada Gazette back in 1806. It says, "To be sold, a black woman named Peggy, aged about 40 years, and a black boy, her son, named Jupiter, aged about 15 years, both of them the property of the subscriber." A lot of these stories, they're not marked in the streets, they're not in the history books. So you have to really go looking for them. I've been thinking a lot about archives lately, and how can we recuperate the humanity of people who've been enslaved when, in the archive, they are seen as property, not as people. And so I wanted to use art and performance to really step into this history. I'm not sure how you're going to do the libations, but if we can be a part of that, then that would be really great.
So when we did libations, we had a song that goes
lovely.
with it, right?
Yeah.
So you're
sing it?
Right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it goes, calling out the ones who have come before us, known and unknown.
This walk that I'm doing, Black Grange, it's basically a walk that opens up the archive.
Grandmother, sister, brother.
So that people can see what has happened, so that we will never repeat what happened.
The power still remains ashe, power to make things change.
We of the African diaspora have traveled through the universe for millennia. No matter where we find ourselves, we arrive knowing that Earth is our home.
The way I set up the piece is to think about a time in the future when the archive is open, when things are not silenced or hidden anymore. And so we represent that future. And we're coming here to do this tour from that point of view of that future. Let's leave notes to honor the hard work and dedication of Toronto's Black parents who became activists in order to ensure that Black children could go to school. I love work that draws a frame around the audience. It's convening a bunch of people and creating a way for them to participate. Like many people held in bondage, Peggy and her children were subjected to constant surveillance. Threats of violence was used to control them, and Peggy was thrown in jail for asserting her self-sovereignty. She is the reason that we're here today. Let us lift our fists to salute Peggy and her defiance. When you think about enslaved people who resisted, they're standing in a place where they are ostracized from the community, and yet they can stand there and see something different and go towards that. That's Afrofuturism. The memory of the Black Grange lives on. May this memory sustain you. You have to be able to see the world differently in order to really create a new world. The thinking comes first before the doing. So to me, it's a mind shift that's really necessary.
All right, thank you. So can we have the next slide? All right. So this is the Grange neighborhood. It's a neighborhood in downtown Toronto near the AGO. And it's the neighborhood that we were walking through in the clip that you just saw. This is where I was first introduced to the history of the enslavement of Black and Indigenous people in colonial Canada. And I knew that there had been a Black community there in the 40s and 50s because my dear friend Tim Dunn, who now lives in Halifax, lived there as a child. And Tim speaks so fondly of this, of the people, the places, the events that he remembers. But when I moved into this neighborhood, I realized that there are very few markers of this history on the streets. And this small plaque, you see this little plaque in here in front of the house, that's one of the very few plaques that marks this history. It's at Cecil Street near Beverly. And when I saw this plaque, this is when I first started thinking about what I was going to do with it. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a close-up of the plaque, and as you can see, it's jam-packed with information. It's as if it's trying to make up for an entire community that's been erased. It tells the story of Donald Willard Moore, a Black man who came to Toronto from Barbados in 1913. Uncle Don, as he was called, had owned a tailor shop a few blocks away on Spadina Avenue. And this shop was the hub of the Caribbean community. People met there regularly to organize for change. And Donald Moore led a delegation to Ottawa in 1954 to confront the Canadian government's increasingly white-only immigration policies. So those of us who are people of color, whose families came here in the 60s or later, owe our presence here to Donald Moore. His efforts helped open up immigration, not just for Black people, but for all people of color. Okay, next slide. So as an artist, I saw this disappearance of this history of the Black community as a challenge. I decided I wanted to create a walk through the area to bring attention to these silenced histories. And in order to find the stories, I invited Dr. Afua Cooper to be the historian researcher on my project. Now the stories Dr. Cooper was bringing to my attention were eye-opening. To my surprise, she was showing me stories not just from the 40s and 50s, but dating back to 1793, to the founding of the town. And this advertisement you're looking at here, it's from the 1806, the Upper Canada Gazette. And this is where I learned that Peggy Pompadour, an enslaved woman, was in this neighborhood, this very neighborhood that I was living in. This ad was posted by Peter Russell, who was the administrator of Upper Canada. Next slide. So there's also a letter in the archive that shows that Peter Russell had tried to sell Peggy to Matthew Elliott, who was a man who lived in Amherstburg, Ontario, and he held about 50 or 60 people in bondage. Peter posted another ad when Peggy escaped, and he had no idea where she was. In that ad, he asserted his right to Peggy as his property, and the law was on his side. He was the administrator of Upper Canada. So he not only enslaved people, he was part of the system that generated the laws that ensured his rights to do so. So holding people as property was common amongst colonial elites. 6 out of 16 of the members of the first Parliament of Upper Canada's Legislative Assembly held humans in bondage. Next slide. So armed with this information, in 2011, I set out to perform my first historical art project. It was called Miss Canadiana's Heritage and Culture Walking Tour. Now the walk was led by Miss Canadiana, as you can see. And this is a persona, a character that I created back in 2002. And I performed this character for over a decade. My presence as a Black woman performing Canadian identity and normative beauty challenged dominant ways that Canada is represented. So even though Black people have been here for over 4 centuries, my body is considered a foreign body. It's not the body that's expected to occupy the role of real Canadian. So this performance creates a tension that confronts these unwritten rules that produce the Canadian nation and produce the reality that we're living in. Next slide. So while I was doing the walk, an older woman who came, she was visibly shaken. And she couldn't believe that slavery had existed, and this is the first time she had heard about it. She asked, but surely people weren't actually sold, were they? So I gave her a copy of the ad that you just saw. Now I want to draw attention to the name of the street that I'm standing at right here. If you can see on your screen, this is Peter Street. Peter Street and Queen. Queen Street used to be called Lot Street because that's where all the lots started. And Peter Street was named after Peter Russell. He owned a 100-acre farm right here. It was called Peter's Field, and Peggy and her family were forced to work here. He was the one who gave out the land, so he made sure he had his name all over it. There's Peter Street, Russell Creek Drive, Russell Hill. And there are many enslavers whose names are embedded on our streets and public places. Jarvis Street, Herkimer Street, the city of Hamilton, for instance, where I'm from, McGill University, just to name a few. Okay, next slide. So meeting Peggy changed the course of my life. I live just steps away from Peter Street, and I feel like I'm walking in her footsteps every time I step outside my door. So since my first walk, I've created many more projects to commemorate Peggy Pompadour and other African-descended people who came here before me. We don't know much about Peggy, but we do know one important thing. She resisted. She performed freedom. And it's this performance of freedom that generated the pieces of evidence that we find in the archive. So this is a photo, this photo here, it's from a series I called After Black Grange. And they coincide with the walk. There's also an online version of the walk on my site, CamilleTurner.com. Okay, so next slide. So since that first walk, I've created many, many more. The walk you see on the left is the one that I created with Alana Bartol in Windsor. And Alana is an artist who came from Windsor. The house that you see here is Francois Bobby House. And it commemorates a family whose property included over 20 people. Now, our walk was a meditation on the people who are not mentioned on any of the museum's interpretive materials. But after the walk, CBC and the Windsor Star did stories on our project. And now the museum has finally acknowledged the family's history. So, and then the picture you see on the right, it's from a sonic walk I created called Hush Harbor. And for that walk, I used the immersive medium of binaurally recorded sound to create a story that it's kind of like a film, but you're inside of it instead of looking at it. It uses voice actors to animate the narrative, and it's scored like a film. There's a narrator, though, who tells you where to walk, where to direct your gaze, and so the story unfolds around you. And in 2017, we created all 10 in the series for a book that was produced by the Art Gallery of Ontario. So, and 3 of the pieces were shown at the AGO's exhibition Every Now Then, Reframing Nationhood, which was curated by Anik Jordan and Andrew Hunter. Now, we were inspired by these advertisements that were posted in 18th century Quebec and New Brunswick newspapers and other newspapers as well. But the ones we used for the series were mainly from Quebec and New Brunswick. As soon as the printing presses appeared in the 18th century, these ads followed in the newspapers. So Kamal and I decided to transform these ads that criminalized people for stealing their own bodies, and we made them into contemporary fashion ads. So we used the detailed descriptions of what they were wearing, as you can see in the ad here, when they escaped. So, and we created contemporary versions of the clothing that they were described as wearing and photographed the performers wearing these clothes. This one is called Belle, and this one was shown in the AGO in the exhibition. Okay, next slide. And there were two that were outside. This one's called Jack, and it was presented 4 stories high, and it was performed by my brother Lee Turner. And it hung above the McCall entry of the Art Gallery of Ontario. Now, I live on McCall Street, and so it was amazing being able to pass this image every day of my brother. And I still remember the look in my mom and dad's faces when they came to see this piece. That was pretty priceless moment. Okay, next slide. This one is performed by Tracy Moore, and you may know her as the host of City Line of City TV. And this image was huge. It was on the Jumbotron at Yonge and Dundas Square on top of the Eaton Center. So creating these images was our attempt to breathe life into the fragments that we find in the archive. We represent the people we encounter there, not as criminals with a bounty on their heads as they appear in these old newspaper ads, but as the freedom fighters that they were. So using our imagination, we liberate them from the past and portray them in future spaces of possibility that they may have imagined as they performed their freedom. Next slide. So Kamal and I have continued to collaborate, and this is from a still of a video installation called Family Matters. And you see the same ad again. We reimagined this advertisement this time, this ad which was selling Peggy and her son, Jupiter. But we imagined Peggy and her son escaping, not to the past, to the present, to our present. And we wondered, would they see the same world that they left behind, hiding in the world that we live in? Okay, so next slide. Currently, Kamal and I are working on a really exciting project. It's a public commission, and it is a monumental piece, a lenticular print that is going to be called House of Bobby. And it commemorates 18 of the Black and Indigenous people who were enslaved by the Bobby family of Windsor. Windsor, Detroit, and Toronto. And so this project is set to launch in September and will be presented at the Great Hall in Union Station. And we've shot it in Union Station as well. So I hope you'll come on out to see it. Next slide. The last project I'm going to talk about is the Afronautic Research Lab. And this is an ongoing performance that has traveled across Canada from BC to Newfoundland. Now, the seeds of this project were planted when I taught a course called Art and Community at University of Toronto. My students and I were exploring alternative research methods. We would walk, we would listen, we would tell stories. And each year we were inspired by Charmaine Nelson's work with her students to go into the archive. So I'd bring them there, I'd show them how to use the microfiche readers, and I would give them the name and date of an 18th century Canadian newspaper, and I would tell them to find evidence of Canadian slavery. Well, as they searched, a different picture of Canada would emerge. They would find people for sale amongst the other goods and services. And they saw ads criminalizing people who managed to escape their bondage. Uh, and these sessions in the archive were just amazing. They never failed to provoke critical discussions. So, what does it mean that these ads are in the archive and yet they're not in history books and museums? And most people have no idea that they exist. And what role do archives, historians, heritage sites, and heritage professionals play in the production of this silence? And what role does this silence play in producing the nation and the reality that we live in? So these are some of the questions that would come up in our discussions. Okay, next slide. So I wanted to make the experiences that my students were having in the archive accessible to the public beyond the walls of the academy. I mean, most people don't go into the archive. So I created the Afronautic Research Lab, which is a futuristic archival reading room that contains hundreds of suppressed documents that I've been gathering over the years. And these documents provide evidence of the deep history of anti-Blackness and Black resistance in Canada. Next slide. The Afronauts who first appeared in my work came from a collaborative piece that I created with Sobaz Benjamin, who's a filmmaker who now lives in Halifax, my sister Karen Turner, and my brother Lee Turner. And we were inspired by the Dogon people of West Africa, whose knowledge of star system predates Western science by thousands of years. Their most sacred star is Sirius B, and it can't be seen with the naked eye. And in fact, Western scientists didn't know about it until the Hubble telescope was invented. Yet it's been a part of the Dogon stories for millennia. Now, in our story, we are the Dogon people who left Earth 10,000 years ago, and we've returned home to heal the planet. And we do that by reconnecting the past to the present. Once the past is connected to the present and reckoned with, then the future must change. So the Afronauts invite visitors into the dark space of the lab, and we keep it deliberately dark. We give them flashlights and magnifying glasses because that's what it feels like when we're trying to shine a light on these suppressed and silenced histories. Since 2016, Afronautic Research Lab has traveled the country, gathering and sharing documents wherever it goes. Next slide. So the latest version of the Afronautic Research Lab was presented in the Bonavista Biennial in Newfoundland in August 2019. And it was inspired by an earlier show called Newfoundlands that was curated by Bushra Junaid and Pamela Edmonds. Bushra is a Newfoundlander, and her parents are Nigerian and Jamaican. And she's been researching Newfoundland's connections to transatlantic and the transatlantic enslavement of Africans for decades. And she generously shared her research with me, including this stunning document. What you're looking at is a letter to Bristol merchant James Rogers from his agent. And it's reporting on a slaving voyage of the Sarah. And the Sarah was a slave ship that was constructed in Newfoundland. So I decided to focus on this ship for the piece that I created for the Bonavista Biennial. And I wanted to try to find others that had been built in the province. Now my partner is a historian, and he encouraged me to look in the slave voyages database. To my surprise, I found 42 ships built all along the eastern seaboard of what is now Canada for the transatlantic slave trade. And 19 of the 42 were built in Newfoundland. Next slide. So normally the Afronautic Research Lab is a 2-hour performance where the Afronauts are present, but because it was going to be a biennial and the work would be up for weeks and I wouldn't be there, I decided that I would create a performance, and the performance would be filmed, and this film would be shown as part of the Afronautic Research Lab. And so I created this character who comes from the future, from a time that she refers to as the Age of Awakening. And she travels back in time to our space-time, and she refers to this time as the Age of Silence. And she arrives bringing not only archival evidence of the slave ships built in Newfoundland, but material evidence as well. Next slide. Now these ships are displacement vessels. They're built to carry a certain amount of weight, and the builders have to weigh down the ships in order to balance them. Now they would have done this, they do this with ballast, and the ballast can be anything. It could be dirt, it could be iron bars, it could be, well, we're in Newfoundland and there's a lot of stone. So I figured the ships would be loaded down with rocks from the shores of Newfoundland. Now, when the slave ships would sail to West Africa, they would dump the rocks on the shore so that the people, their intended cargo, could be loaded in to their cargo holds. So this futuristic character finds this rock in West Africa, and she brings it back to Newfoundland, where it originated. Next slide. My character travels across the land with this rock, and she brings it into the space where the archival evidence is on view, and she leaves these simple graphics representing each of these 19 slave ships with their names and the dates that they were built as a kind of altar. And the slave ships have, long dissolved into the sea. The trees that the ships were made from have been cut down long ago. But in the absence of the actual material traces, the rock stands in as a witness to the crimes of the past. And bringing the rock into the space brings the story home. Next slide. So I am going to show the video that I made in Newfoundland. It's about 6 minutes long. Right.
What can I bring back from the past? What new fragments of stories can I recover? What clues can I find to explain how the Great Awakening was forged? I'm a listener, a teller of stories. My mission is to honor the ancestors, the stolen ones who were forced through the door of no return, forced to forget their names, their languages, their homes, their loved ones. For centuries, they endured a constant assault on their lives and liberty. It is the responsibility of the living to honor the dead. I tell stories of the silence that was created to cover up this crime, to bury the stories of how their unfree labor created the modern world. Silence has a way of fraying at the edges, thin lips, closed mouths, claims to innocence, not knowing and not wanting to know. I tell stories of the reckoning, the time when crimes of the past were laid bare, transgressions atoned for, debts owed were paid. The time of the awakening followed. The world was unmade and recreated anew. Awakening is a most precious gift, and those of us who live in this time of peace and prosperity must always be vigilant. Our freedom was paid for long before we were born. I come to honor ancestors on both sides of this ocean who gave birth to the future and whose lives are forever intertwined. When silence covered this land, it suppressed the knowledge that slave ships were built here. In the bellies of those floating tombs, people were chained together and transported as cargo. Millions lost their lives. I pay homage to those who were imprisoned on the slave ships that were built in Newfoundland. The Antelope, Betsy, Chance, Fly, Friends, Friendship, Good Hope, Maria, Morning Star, Ocean, Roebuck, Sarah, Swallow, Toni, Torbay, and Wasp. 14% of the 246 people who were loaded in the cargo hold of the Friendship built in 1785 died during its journey from New Calabar to Montego Bay. Out of the 269 captured people who journeyed on the Betsy from Banks Island to Charleston, 39 died. The bitter taste of violence lingers in places where trees were cut down to make these ships. The forests were consumed along with the life that they had sustained. A deep silence enveloped the forests. The waves lapping against these shores witnessed this crime. They hold the memory of the dead whose bodies were thrown overboard, and those who survived this treacherous journey to author a new world. Rocks from these shores were placed on ships as ballasts. When the ships sailed to the African continent, the rocks were taken off. People were loaded in. The rocks who witnessed these crimes are stranded on the other side of the Atlantic. Rocks do not forget. They will always be a part of this place.
So next slide. So this piece really struck a chord, and it sparked public discussions and debates and media attention all over the province and beyond. What I found most striking about the project, though, was the silence of many of Newfoundland's historians and heritage professionals. The Haitian anthropologist Michel Rolph Trio insists that silencing is an active process. If silence was not constantly produced, maintained, and tended to, it would disappear. Producing silence allows the false and nostalgic mythologies of Canada to remain in place. When the past is obscured and disconnected from the present, we can't dismantle the oppressive systems that persist, that the silence upholds. So through the Afronautic Research Lab, I gather and share the archival records that subvert the guardians of history in order to make the archive tell a different story. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Camille, and for your work. I love it at the end in the captions for the video that the ocean was interpreted as applause.
I know,
I
isn't
think
that
that's very
beautiful?
fitting.
Yeah.
So we'll now take questions from the audience. I don't think people can actually speak to them, so they'll have to put them in the chat.
I gotta say, it's lovely to be back in Halifax, even though I'm not physically there. Halifax is a place that I feel a deep connection to, and I hope to be back soon. Yeah.
We hope to be able to have you in person and
Really lovely.
not have to Zoom host. But
Oh,
we wish you were here too, Camille.
oh my gosh. Yeah. It almost happened last year.
We got very close, didn't we?
Very,
Oh,
very, very
it
close.
was so
That
frustrating.
oh. Yeah. Next time.
So we have our first question. Roz Power asked, first, thank you, Camille. And can you tell us if there was an art facility connected to the cosmonauts in Newfoundland?
An art facility? Oh, how did they, you mean where were they situated? Um, is that what you mean, Roz? I'm not sure. I've never
Yes.
been here. Okay, all right. So the Buena Vista Biennial, I encourage anyone who hasn't been to go. It's amazing. What they do is they repurpose um, all kinds of buildings, like root cellars. I was in the fish house called Mock Beggar's Plantation, so you can imagine how happy I was. It was just perfect. Um, so it was an actual fish facility, and this is, as I found out just recently, the oldest wooden building in Newfoundland. So it was around at the time when these ships would have been built, and it's you could see in the pictures there. It was a beautiful old building, and everything's just kind of crumbling away. The patina on the wooden beams, and it's built with massive wooden beams, trees that don't exist in Newfoundland anymore, and that entire shoreline was heavily treed, and so these trees, were the trees that would have built these ships, would have built this building. It was really interesting just where we were situated, and I mean, I keep researching it, and there's just more and more interesting nuances, you know. So that's where we were situated. It wasn't an art space per se, but it was the whole town became an art space. So please go to the Buena Vista Biennial. It's amazing.
Anything can be an art space. I love that. Thank you. So we actually have three chats happening at the same time. So Cyrus Ware asks, Camille, can you talk about your next projects and where you are headed as we head into this changing future? What's next?
Oh my gosh. Well, the House of Bobby, I'm really excited about that big piece that we're doing together, Kamal and I, at the Union Station. So hopefully it'll be unveiled in September. It's already been pushed back. So, we never know how things are gonna work out with that. But I'm really excited about it because it honors the 18 of the people that we know about. We know their names that were the property of the Bobby family, and so this connects to some of the earlier work that I was doing in Windsor. And then there's a piece called Rocks that we just shot as well, and I'm very excited about that one. So this piece here, the Afronautic Research Lab Newfoundland, was inspiring in starting to think through rocks, and so this next piece that we did is thinking about the time scale of rocks, the way that rocks contain memory, like they contain the memory of the earth, and so it's basically people listening to rocks, wearing rocks on their bodies. It was a beautiful piece to work on, and I'm very excited to unveil that soon. Yeah, and then also I'm in the Toronto Biennial, and I'm very excited about that piece. And that's it's still in process. It's a piece called Nave, and it's looking at the churches, right? The word nave comes from Navi, which is the same word for church and ship. And the churches were actually built by the shipwrights. So if you look up into the nave of the church, it's like looking down into the hold of the ship. So this is a meditation on the people that were carried on these ships through this idea of the nave. Thanks for asking, Cyrus.
I think just going back to the other chat, Neil Forrest asks, hi Camille, can you please tell us the reaction of the Black community to your work when you acted as Miss Canadiana?
Oh, as Miss Canadiana. Oh my gosh. I'd rather talk about Afronautic Research Lab, actually, because it's more, it's what I'm doing now. I feel like Afronautic Research Lab, the response of the Black community is very different because it's a history that we are all a part of, all of us. It's the foundation of the modern world that we're living in. But we sit within this history differently. So people have different responses. I presented this in a class once, and someone said, this is like a rite of passage to Canadian Blackness. It kind of, and then I get responses like, oh my gosh, thank you for validating our truth. It's all of the things that are hidden in the archive that explains the world that we're living in, that we are always, it's kind of presented as this this innocent space, but here are all these things that created the anti-blackness that we are living within, but there's nothing to sort of back it up. This is what backs it up, So it's been really interesting doing this work. That's the response of the Black community to this work. It's, and this is the reason why I do this work. It's to center Blackness, to really think about, the stakes for Black people in this place. Yeah, in terms of Miss Canadiana, it was really a fun piece. But I feel like, I've moved on from that. This is a piece that, lasted for over a decade, and it was really wonderful to do it. But I feel like the work that I'm doing now is so much more I don't know, gets to the core of what I was trying to reach for back then that couldn't be said by Miss Canadiana. You know what I mean?
Camille, the next question is from Erin Morton on Facebook. Thank you so much for your presentation. I teach several of your projects in my class, including Miss Canadiana and the Afronautics Research Lab. As you created in Newfoundland, I'm wondering if you can say more about the silence of the historians in the latter project. What do you make of it? And the question goes on, is this part of the larger silence about Canada's history of enslavement of African descendants? Is it part of a particular rejection of this history of enslavement in Atlantic Canada, especially as it connects to larger industries that speak to notions of regional labor culture, such as boat building? And just another part to that question is there something specific to the discipline of history? So that's coming from Erin Morton.
Thank you, Erin. Wow. I think there's a negation of blackness as part of the nation, because to admit that enslavement of African peoples is a part of the history is to admit that there's over 400 years of the black presence in this place, and that's never been the sort of way that black people are taken up. This is the reason why Miss Canadiana, for instance, was a relevant piece, you know. So I think it speaks to the silencing of this history and the suppression of the presence of black people here. But and it's not just limited to history. I mean, Newfoundland is very now with the Newfoundland is very connected to immigration, tourism, and the tourist industry really presents a narrative that is very much about that very much silences this history, put it that way. So it's not just the historians, it's the tourism industry, it's the educational system. And the educational system is very complicit in this. For instance, the history of the enslavement of African and Indigenous people, it's on the curriculum here in Ontario, but it's optional. People don't teach it because they don't know how to teach it. They don't know it themselves. They don't have to teach it. The educational system does not, they don't prioritize this story. They don't foreground the story. It's just really, there's a lot of levels that silence is produced on. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
It's a big question.
So Barbara Launder asks, thanks for your presentation, Camille. Can you please speak about the experience of your work in person during a walk, for example, and in documentation? Do you feel that the audience participation is different?
Yeah. There's something really special and magical that happens when you're in situ, when you're actually in the place where the stories happened, and you're walking around with people. So if that's what you mean, I would say that in person it's quite powerful. That feeling of being in communion in a space. The Afronautic Research Lab as well, that feeling of, everybody is in this room. We're all looking at these historical materials. We're all experiencing what we're experiencing, in different ways. We're experiencing different things depending on, our relationship to the materials, but it's a room that's very charged with emotion. People are upset sometimes. People are angry. People are, I don't know, there's tears. There's all kinds of feels that are going on, And so So yeah, the experience in person is definitely a pretty intense experience, you know. It's and as Afronauts, you know, and there are so many Afronauts that I've had over the years. Ayoka was one of my Afronauts one time, which was really wonderful. Um, yeah, it's just this I don't know. We're witnessing people witnessing their own history. And so it's pretty special. It's yeah, I don't know how to explain it. Come and see, come and experience it.
I'm sure Barbara would. Uh, so Sally Morgan asks, well, thank you so much, Camille.
Sally.
You sort of already answered this, but it seems like you might have to bring her back by popular demand, but will Miss Canadiana return?
Oh,
And
God.
wondering if you could say a bit about your methods for gathering local histories.
Okay. Well, we'll have to find a younger Miss Canadiana. That's so I don't know that she'll return, but um yeah, to gather local histories, it depends. You know, I was so blessed in Newfoundland. The I had for the Bonavista Biennial, I actually had a residency at Two Rooms, that's run by Catherine Baudette, and I had, you know, time, and that's such a luxury to be able to be in a place, to be able to walk on the land, to be able to listen to the ocean. The you know, everything is information, and one of the things that was really powerful is this last trip I brought my partner with me, and he's very attuned to hearing, to and we had just been to Costa Rica just a few weeks before, where it's just like a cacophony of sound. And then we come to Newfoundland and he's like, "Yeah, it's beautiful, but it's so quiet." And it's that clue of silence was something that I followed, and that led me to think about, you know, why is it silent? What is going on? And that's when I found this image where it was a picture of the bay with all these flakes and snaking around the bay. Now, flakes are these drying racks, basically, but they're huge. They're made out of they're kind of these platforms, and they were, you know, one after the other after the other. You could just like walk around the entire bay on these flakes. I mean, that was a stunning picture, you know, because the bay is really like there's nothing on the bay now. Like there's no trees at all. So I asked, you know, where did these trees come from to make this? And they said, oh, this area used to be like all trees. It's it's completely barren now. That area is barren along Bonavista Bay, and so that was a stunning moment for me. You know, so this is information. Silence is not absence. It's information. It's direction, and so I follow the silences. And that's what you got to do when you're doing this kind of work. You got to follow the silences. Sometimes, you know, there's archival evidence and sometimes there isn't. Sometimes there's material evidence, sometimes there isn't. But silence is as much information as, you know, presence.
So the next question from Michael Eddy speaks to this. Thank you for your presentation. Could you say something about balancing this silence and the call to respond you mentioned at the end with regard to historians who may or may not be from an African diaspora, with caution regarding not speaking for others, not just in terms of this project, but in general, if this is relevant?
Sorry, I didn't understand about the not speaking for others. Say that again.
Um, so the call to respond you mentioned at the end with regard to historians,
Yes.
and it's those historians who may or may not be from an African diaspora.
Oh, I see. So they're okay. Well, okay. This is the typical response that I got from historians. Oh, that's outside my expertise. Or, oh, I've never heard of that. But there was never this like, oh my God, what? Like, let me help you, or let's see what we can, do to contribute. That was not was that was the kind of responses I get. So the thing is, this is our history, all of our history. It belongs to all of us. So um, it's kind of a not wanting to know. That is the thing that I found. This way of holding those silences in place um, by not wanting to know, by not being curious, by not digging. Like at Bobby House, for instance. Why is it that they never talked about the people that were enslaved in that house? Why was it never even mentioned? It wasn't a part of the interpretive materials, nothing. And it wasn't that they didn't know about it. They did know about it. They had the book by Michel Rolfe Trouillot, who has all of the people that were enslaved by the family. So they knew this history, but they did nothing about it. So there's this complicity and this I don't know, I just have to say it's like a deliberate um, silencing. It's an active process. So yeah, whether they're from the African diaspora or not, this is the history that we're all a part of, and it needs to be presented and acknowledged and reckoned with. How are we ever gonna get beyond this if we don't reckon with, you know, what produced this moment?
Camille, we have a question from Daryl Varga, our colleague. Hi, Camille. The way you are discovering evidence is fascinating. The witnessing of the rocks and trees, for example, inviting us to rethink the idea of visuality. And as a counter to the institutional silencing of history, I want to ask whether, in addition to the evidence of slave shipbuilding in Atlantic Canada, is there evidence of slave labor in the building of these ships?
Oh, that's a good question. That I don't know yet. Um, it would be interesting to find that, but I don't know that question. Um, yeah, if you have any clues, or anyone has any clues, I'm taking.
So the next question comes from Excel. I just want to say that I love how you use the idea of futurity as reframed reality to reckon with Canada's haunting pasts and present. Did the act of adapting future characters and personas dilute the emotional labor of having to explain these topics to a wider audience?
Ooh, that's a very interesting question. Like, did it dilute it for me?
I think so.
Yeah, I don't really. That's a very interesting question. I have to really think about that. I don't really think it dilutes it. I'm trying to think of that might be a question I'll be chomping at for a while. Huh. Does it dilute it? Yeah, no, I mean, in terms of, I don't, I feel like my presence in the piece is not, yeah. The work is really trying to draw a frame around the audience. It's really trying to open it up so people are a part of it. It's a social practice um, where people are, you know, it's not about me. Like this frame is not this one. It's about, everyone who's co-creating this reality together and animating it together. So I think from what I'm experiencing, it's very potent. It's a very potent space that's created. And even though there's these Afronauts and we're this fantastic, you know, characters that are fantasy, there's something really intense and visceral and emotional. There's a lot of emotional labor that happens in this space. So I wouldn't say it dilutes it, and I don't feel that that's what I'm trying to do when I'm creating this. I go to science fiction. Um, I go to this place of fantasy because there's no words. There's no roadmap. It really feels like sci-fi, you know, this place that's silenced, and yet this all this evidence exists. So for me, it's just a way of dealing with this, you know. It just seems appropriate going to this place of fantasy, sci-fi. Um, you know, I call what my methodology Afronautics. I usually talk about that, but I didn't this time. And Afronautics is centering blackness. These are the principles. It's thinking about time as not non-linear, and using imagination as a tool for building worlds. So that's my methodology. And more I'm beginning to understand that silence as information and direction is a part of that methodology as well. I hope that answered what you wanted to know.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Chris asks, has your research uncovered connections to slavery in your native Hamilton?
Oh gosh, yes. Oh my gosh. Um, yeah, well, I'm saying that, you know, the city is named after a slave owner, right? Um, but also there are so many connections. I had this hypothesis that if you look at any of these heritage museums that have a name on it, just research that name, that person, and you'll find a connection um, to enslavement. And I found that three times in all three houses that I've done research in. So one of them is Battlefield House. It used to be called Bellevue, and it's, you know, very close to where I grew up, near Stony Creek. It commemorates the Battle of Stony Creek and all of that. Well, this house was owned by someone who owned plantations in Trinidad, and he, you know, after slavery ended, the people that were enslaved weren't paid out, you know, for their pain and suffering and everything they endured, but the people that owned them were. And so he was one of these people that got tons of money for, you know, after slavery was abolished. And he bought this house the next year. So yeah, there's a lot of connections. Honestly, like as Dion Brand says, we're awash in it. It is everywhere. There's nothing you can look at and not see these connections, you know? And once you start realizing that, you start seeing it everywhere. It's the foundation of the world that we're living in.
Camille, I'm going to pull my facilitator's privilege and I'm going to ask the last question. In your Afronautics project, you talked about how the historical stage in the archive where of the silence, the age of silencing. And the Afronautic figure is the harbinger of the age of awakening. But in between that, there's an age of reckoning. Do you think in our time with Black Lives Matters and the mobilization amongst Asian Americans, Asian Canadians against anti-racism and social movements, do you think that we are in an age of reckoning? And do you think that the age of awakening is upon us post-pandemic?
Wow. We definitely are not at the age of awakening, but there is some reckoning going on. I say some because, you know, um, yeah, there's a quote by Frederick Douglass: power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. This is, it's important to realize that these systems of oppression are very resilient. They're very, they're very slippery, and they are fighting back. So I think there is some reckoning going on, but there's definitely a lot more that needs to happen. For instance, I've done work in Mississauga in the Heritage Museum, their Bradley House Museum. Mississauga would probably, and I don't know if this has happened, but I've heard that it's happening, that the heritage museums, instead of dealing with what is actually instead of dealing with this past, it's just easier to close them. It's like, oh my God, let's just close them. Let's just, move on from here. And I'm not just pointing a finger at Mississauga. It's everywhere. So I think there's a lot more reckoning that needs to happen. I don't know how, for instance, the site that I did the Afronautic Research Lab Newfoundland in has changed or is going to change. I know that Bobby House, for instance, yes, they acknowledge that enslavement happened there, but it's just like one line in their didactic in their permanent collection. Like that's the extent to which they had reckoned with it. And I heard that the curator is now interested in doing this work because she's kind of forced to. And I think it's up to all of us. We know this story now. We are all we're all implicit in in this age of reckoning to actually do something, to actually to make sure that this story doesn't just stay silenced. Our silence silences the story. So it's really important now to keep the institutions, to keep their feet to the fire, to make it clear that no, it's not okay to just be business as usual, or to just make empty claims to solidarities with Black and Indigenous people, but I mean, this is there is a possibility of change, and there definitely is change happening, but I'm very mindful that this could easily get subverted, and get rolled back. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Camille. Thank you for meeting with us and for your generosity today. I think since we're 10 minutes to, I think we'll wrap up, but I just want to thank you so much again. And thank you to Anik, our wonderful tech person, my co-host, Marissa, and of course the interpreters, Tegan and Ayoka. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Lots of thanks. I can't tell if you can see the chat, but it's filling up with thank
Oh
yous.
my gosh. Oh, this is lovely. Oh, we have to save the chat so I can read them after.
Yeah, can we do that?
Thank
I'm sure
you.
Anik can figure that out.
Guys, you're amazing. Thank you.
And please come back and see us in person.
As soon as I can, I will be back. I was getting so excited last year when we were planning this trip, and it was so disappointing when COVID just, I don't know, all our plans.
I mean, we even had the tickets, we had everything. We were like,
No.
it's gonna happen. Soon,
Next
soon, we
time,
can do
next
this.
time. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your virtual presence.
Thank you so much. Oh, wow. So is somebody saving the chat?
I don't, Nick, are you able
Yeah.
to do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I can do
Let
that.
me switch
And
it
then
to
we
it
can
'cause I
send it
cannot
to-
read all of them right now, but I will definitely read after. Thank you.
Then I think we can, if we download it, we can send it to you. So
All right. Thanks so much. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
And you too. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye, Camille. Okay, so Anik, if people are out or as they're leaving,
Mhm.
the best way for anybody to save the chat
Mhm.
is you have live transcript on, correct?
I don't know. I don't think so.
For the
Live-
captions, if you had a live transcript, anybody can just save it at the end, but I think it's still live.
yeah, I think we're still live.
Yeah.
We're still recording.
It's okay. I can cut this off. It's okay. Yep. So I can just, it automatically saves it on the cloud. But I'm going to save it here just in case.
Not the cloud. Oh,
That's
I
a side
figured-
conversation we can have at another time, Anik, and I can just show you how to turn on live transcript because it's different than the regular captioning.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I look forward for you to tell me about that.
Nick, can you then tell me?
Yes.
Sounds good.
There's so much to learn.
I know. They keep changing it too.
Yeah. It's always evolving. Hey. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. I guess we'll just be in touch through email or something, and we'll keep you in that loop as well, April.
Thank you so much.
We're still live, so
Yeah.
get out of this one.
Yep,
Thank you. Thank you so
thanks,
much.
Everyone,
Bye.
I'm going to end this meeting.
Thank you, Take.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.